I'd love for you to join me May 19th at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, where we're going to answer your questions live on how to rock retirement in this age of inflation and everything else going on, as well as talk about the open enrollment period for the Rock Retirement Club. You can learn more and register at livewithroger.com. Exercise is king. Nutrition is queen. Put them together and you have a kingdom. From the great Jack LaLanne. Remember those outfits? Well, hey there. Welcome to the Retirement Answer Man Show. My name is Roger Whitney. I am your host. This is the show dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement financially. Yes, that's important. We're focused on helping you have the confidence to lean in and rock retirement. That's what it's about. Life. And today, we're starting a series that's really important because if we get the financial stuff right and we get the dreams big enough, that's not going to mean diddly if we don't functionally have the ability to go live those dreams and spend that money. So we got to be functionally healthy. And that's what we're going to focus on this entire month. Today, we're going to start off talking about what functional health is. And then next week, we're going to talk about exercise and movement. And then the week after that, we're going to talk about nutrition. And then we're going to end up the week trying to give a framework for you to create your functional health plan and navigate and figure out what actually works and what doesn't if you have to deal with stuff. And to do that, we're bringing on an expert, a member of the Rock Retirement Club, Dr. Bobby DEVOE, who is amazingly smart and kind and full of wisdom to help us on this journey, because obviously I'm not an expert there. And we're going to answer some of your questions as well each week. Now, before we get to that, I got two quick announcements. One is on May 19th, I'd love for you to join me on an online event on Zoom where I'm going to hang out for an hour. I don't know how long, an hour or so, answering your questions about rocking retirement, about finances, about the non-financial aspect. So that's number one. You can learn about that at livewithroger.com and register for that event. It'll be, I think that's a Thursday on the 19th at 7 p.m. Central. And even if you can't join, if you want the replay, still sign up because we'll send out an email with the replay. The second announcement is that same day, we are opening up enrollment for our next cohort into the Rock Retirement Club. We only open it up a few times a year. We'll talk about that on the meetup as well, and you can ask questions about that. What is the Rock Retirement Club? It is this online community that we've had for about 3.5 years, where there's over 800 people receiving on-demand, I think, world-class education on building your financial plan so you can have a framework to have the confidence to rock retirement. But also we have online meetups weekly that coach on the financial aspects of retirement, on the non-financial aspects of retirement. And then we have over 800 people sharing their wisdom to help each other on this journey. And it's pretty incredible. In fact, we're going to have our third RRC Roundup, which is actually an in-person conference, October 7th through the 9th for Rock Retirement Club members in Grapevine, Texas, right by the airport. And that's totally free as part of the benefit. You just got to get yourself there. So if you're interested in joining the Rock Retirement Club and having a safe place to get education and answers, check that out at livewithroger.com, and maybe we'll chat. Now, with that, let's bring on the doctor and set the stage for dealing with functional health. So we're going to bring on Dr. DEVOE, but I want to let you know that if you have a question or a thought on functional health as we go through this series, you can email us directly. If you get the 6-Shot Saturday email, you can reply to that and share your question or your thoughts on functional health. Or you can go to rogerwhitney.com/askroger. And I would love to hear your questions and your thoughts, because in the last episode of the month, we're going to do a special segment where we're going to be answering your questions and sharing some thoughts on functional health. So if you have any thoughts or questions along the way, do one of those two things. And with that, let's bring on the doctor and set the stage of what we're talking about with functional health. So Bobby, I'm excited to get into this whole month of functional health. And first off, I want to thank you for raising your hand, because at the last rodeo roundup, you pinned me down and say, dude, this is important. We should talk about this. What motivated you to do that, by the way?
Well, the club and the offering are fantastic. It really has helped me because now I'm actually retired, 2 months retired. And it's helped me to sort of gain the confidence that the financial side of retirement, I've thought it through adequately and that I feel prepared. The club and the interactions in your podcast help me to think about what am I going to do during retirement and will that be fulfilling? And I think it gave me a framework for, as you like to say, rocking retirement. But what struck me, and we'll talk a little bit about my background, I guess, later as a physician and as an athlete, is that we're missing an important piece of the puzzle, which is you can have all the money in the world and you can have great purpose. But if physically you can't do the things you want to do, it's really hard to rock retirement. As a physician and helping patients, that comes first to me. And I was like, wait a second, that's the third leg of this stool. There's purpose, there's finances, but then there's your whole ability to do things. And somebody who can't keep their mouth shut when an idea pops into my head. So, of course, I brought it up to you.
Well, and it's spot on, obviously, because we're talking about it now. Before we get into what functional health is, let's sort of outline who you are. Now, you mentioned you're a medical doctor, and you're retired. But give me the high-level story so we have an understanding of your perspective from a professional, but also the personal athlete end of it.
So when I went into medicine, and I'm a third-generation doctor, so I didn't really have a choice. I just sort of like, of course I'm going to be a doctor. But I had this sort of nagging suspicion in the back of my mind that there was more to what I wanted to do in life than just caring for patients. That I always had this kind of entrepreneurial, financial, big picture side of me. So I went to medical school at Johns Hopkins and then became an internist, went to my residency and did all of that. But at the end of my clinical training, I realized that there was another piece of this puzzle. And so I ended up getting a PhD in health policy at the RAND Corporation, which is a think tank research group in Santa Monica, and really was interested in understanding what works in healthcare and frankly, what doesn't. What do things cost? And is it a good bargain? Is it not a good bargain? And so that's really been my life quest. And there's a lot of roadblocks. Scientifically, we may or may not know what works. And then the insurance company doesn't pay for it and patients don't get it and doctors forget to offer it. So I spent multiple decades on different sides of this equation. So the first decade, I thought about it from the insurance company managed care side of the ledger, and then worked with providers on behalf of the sort of the electronic health records world, and then worked a lot with the pharmaceutical industry and where the government fits in and all of that. So I've always thought what works. And then once we know what works, don't put barriers in front of people and let's figure out a system that folks can have it. So that's kind of the medical side of the equation. So I love caring for individual patients, but I'm really fascinated by how do you think about it from a population level.
So how is that? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead. How does that change as you've gotten older?
Well, back in the 80s and 90s, marathons were for the elite. And I remember in college seeing one of my really athletic roommates in a bath with ice around him. He had just done the Boston Marathon. I had gone to Harvard. And I was like, oh my God, only crazy people do marathons. And I was in my late 30s and it was like, well, if I'm ever going to do one of these things, I guess I better get started. And so I got bitten by the endurance athlete bug. And so I did marathons for about 10 years and then decided, well, there's this thing called triathlon. And so it's just a couple more sports, swimming and biking. So I started doing those. And I started doing triathlons. And because I'm sort of a type A person, well, you could do a short one, medium one, long one, might as well do the long ones or work your way up to it. So I did Ironman triathletes for quite a while. And then with COVID, I haven't done one since then. So I have always been really interested in physical health and what can I do and just the enjoyment of it. So helping other people as a physician on a big picture level and then sort of health in my own life have really been cornerstones. And so when I think about helping others through the club or whatever, that's just sort of a natural combination for me.
Endurance sports are great for very focused and a little obsessive compulsive type people. I know I've done that.
Absolutely.
How does that experience coupled with the medical part relate to like more normal people that don't do those things? There's a lot of lessons I know from my experience to learn from recovery and nutrition, et cetera, but there's a lot that brings to it, I would assume.
That's a really great question, because when I listen to others who are elite athletes, I'm not an elite athlete. It's like, well, that's not me. I think I'll tune out. I can't do any of that kind of stuff. As a physician, you realize that one of the strongest predictors of a patient dying is if they fall and break their hip. And it's not the fall itself, it's what led to the fall. And once you've broken your hip, it's hard just to get back into good enough shape. And it usually deteriorates. And within a year, many people die. So why did they fall in the first place? And what can we do to prevent it? And some of it is your general health that caused it. Some of it is your muscle strength. So that became very clear to me that we need to do something about it. And then the other is that sadly, our muscle mass deteriorates by 1% to 2% a year, no matter what you do. I mean, it's just a function of aging. And if you don't have a lot of muscle mass, you're going to lose it. And so you need to work at it. And as we'll get into later in terms of what is good functioning, that's another piece of the puzzle that we have to be proactive about. So all of these are things that folks, whatever their proclivities are, can and should do. And I hope what we get to in the podcast is a motivation that people say, oh, yeah, I know I'm supposed to exercise. Now they realize, oh my God, these are things I really want to do as a part of my basic life. Like I would like to travel on an airplane, and I'm going to have a carry-on bag, and I got to put it in the overhead bin. Well, that's an exercise, and you may or may not be able to do it if you don't think about it now and start working towards that. Simple things that we all want to be able to do, not just somebody who wants to run a 5K or a 10K.
Yeah, I was thinking of a client a few years ago that was doing a cruise down the Rhine River, and they were really concerned because it's a small boat and goes down the Rhine, and then you have all these little stops to walk into these ancient cities. And all the steps are not ADA compliant. They're hundreds of years old bricks that are all cobbled and everywhere else. And they were really worried about falling and how they're going to manage that because it wasn't easy from a structure standpoint. That's probably a good example too. You got to be able to have the balance and the flexibility to manage uneven steps and things like that.
And you should start thinking about, as we'll get into, way in advance. I mean, you think about retirement 20 or 30 years in advance. Oh, I guess I got to put money in an IRA so it'll grow and I'll have something for later on. Well, you got to put the same money in the physical bank so that you're going to be able to go on that river cruise or that RV vacation or enjoy the boat that you've always dreamed that you might have.
So I want to talk about how health goals should change as we age. And I was laughing about this morning, Bobby, because I took a shower, was getting dressed and everything else, and I had my shirt on or off and looked in the mirror. And I felt like early on through my life, coming up in the 80s and 90s and being fairly active, you always looked in the mirror as to be the indication of how your health is in terms of your muscles and how they look and everything else. And I was laughing at myself because it's just a natural thing to do. And at 55, it's really not that important, right? That outward appearance of vitality, whether you're male or female, isn't near as important as we get older. So our goals change. So what's important?
Well, that is a fabulous question. And it brings me to, I would say, one of the most important epiphanies for me as I think about this. So when we're 20 years old and somebody says, let's go play some basketball. And if we're in reasonably good shape, you go play basketball. And then somebody says, oh, why don't we play soccer? We'll kick the soccer ball around. Or we're going to go for a hike up this big giant mountain. You know, if you're in roughly decent shape as a 20-year-old, you can do anything. I mean, that's just what being in shape is. What I've learned over the years as I age is that you really aren't in shape for everything. So I'm fine. I can go do a nice long run. But the other day on the ranch, I was painting. And when you paint, your arms go above your shoulder because you've got the paintbrush and you're going up and down. After 3 minutes, I was exhausted and breathing hard. And I was like, well, this makes no sense. I'm, quote, in shape. And this epiphany I've had over the years is that different activities entail different muscles. And you really actually need to think about those in advance and begin to maintain them so that if you decide willy-nilly, I'm going to paint, you can. And you don't just give up after 2 minutes like I did and say, well, I guess I better hire the painter. And it gets much more serious when you think about, well, I have a grandchild and I want to really enjoy my grandchild. And if I can't like squat down and pick up my grandchild and then stand up and carry him around, that's really a problem. Well, you may or may not be able to do that in 10 years, and you may not be able to do it today. And there are specific exercises if that's one of your things you want to do. I know we had talked in advance about sort of putting this in the framework of financial planning.
Well, before we go there, Bobby, I think that's a good structure. So the title of this whole month series is Functional Health. So let's just make sure we define what that is. I think we've hit why this is important. As we get older, what I heard was you can't just be healthy. You have to structure your nutrition and your exercise and your treatments with the end of the things that you want to do in mind. So just give me a basic definition of what functional health is so we can focus on that.
Yeah, and that's a critical distinction. I mean, when I think about health, and when most people do, you say, I want to live a long life. Okay, so longevity and years of life is a critical piece of the puzzle. So there are things that we can talk about that will help in extending your life, your nutrition and cardiovascular health and those kinds of things. But the other piece of the puzzle is you may live a long time, but are you free of pain? Are you able to get around? Are you able to do these types of activities that you want to do? And that's your functional ability. And some people call it quality of life. So there's quantity of life and there's quality of life. So it all kind of folds into the rubric of quality of life. I can't open the top of a bottle because I have a bit of arthritis in my hands. Well, your functioning isn't what you would like it to be. Some things are inevitable and you can't really stop them, but there's a lot of things that we can have control over. And that's the function that we really want. I mentioned a statistic to you the other day that studies have been done that look at who are the happiest people on earth. And it turns out that if you look at age groups, the people who are 65 to 79 are the happiest age group. And the most unhappy age group is 45 to 54. And there's a lot of reasons, because obviously in the 45 to 54, you're dealing with family and finances and all those kinds of things. And this has been duplicated all around the world. There's a huge study in the UK, but there's been ones here as well. And a key part of being happy when you're 65 to 79, obviously, it's all the things you don't have to worry about, like going to a job, but having the time to do the things you want to do. And within the group that's the happiest of the 65 to 79 are those that have the ability to do the activities that they really, really want to do.
That's a great distinction. And I'm so glad I'm 55. So now I'm out of the least happiest group.
There you go. Congratulations.
And I've been really diving into stoicism and other things. And I thought one thing I found that was interesting is historically, maybe it's because I didn't live very long, but it was the focus was on the quality and what you did with your life more than the length of your life. And when we talk about longevity, a lot of times longevity as by itself becomes the goal, the quantity rather than the quality. And we had a good discussion in the club here recently that was really interesting about, I don't want longevity. I want to have a lot of quality, and I'm okay if I don't live a long time. I think that quality part is key. One thing I used to say was, hey, you're probably going to live longer than any generation. And if you're not investing in your health, you'll still live long. It will just suck more, was the way I used to say it, right? Investing in your health functionally and nutritionally is probably one of the best investments that you can make. So let's talk about a framework of how do we invest in our health. And just to let everybody know, next week, we're going to talk about exercise and how we focus on that domain. And then the week after, we're going to talk about nutrition in that domain. And then we'll finish this series about how do we create a plan and know what works and what doesn't work, because that's very confusing by itself. But what's a good framework for approaching this, Bobby?
Well, the framework that you've put together and that financial advisors put together, I think is a great place to begin. So I am a start with the end in mind kind of guy. The 7 Habits for Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, or more simplistically, Alice in Wonderland, where Alice in this new place and is all strange and says to the Cheshire Cat, which way should I go? And the Cheshire Cat says, well, where do you want to end up? And she says, well, I don't know. then she says, then the Cheshire Cat says, well, it doesn't really matter which way you go. You have to kind of have a sense of where you're going, and then you can figure out how to get there. So on the financial side, you've taught us to envision, what do you want to be doing over the period of your time? What are the costs associated with that? Well, I got to have my house and my food and entertainment, my car. And, oh, by the way, I'd like to go on those trips. And I've always wanted to buy that boat. And whether you put it into kind of needs, wants, and desires or whatever, you have a plan of what it is you want to do that has cost associated with it. So that's the first part of the plan. The second part of the plan, as you teach us, is, so what are your assets and can you pay for that plan? And if you can, lovely, go forth and have fun. And if you can't, then you may need to figure out working longer, having a side gig, or all those other kinds.
Right.
And I think, because there's no sense having another framework, let's just use the same one and begin with, who do you want to be in your last decade of life? And what do you want to be doing? So are you envisioning you're in your go-go years now, and yeah, but when I'm 70 or 75, I just think I'll sit in front of the TV. That's really what my vision is. Okay, well, fine. You have every right to do that. And let's work backwards to make sure that when you do that, you're pain-free and you can get up and go to the kitchen and do whatever you need to do. Or you might say, look, I want to be active when I'm 75, 80, 85. Well, what does active mean to you? Well, I want to be able to go on a hike in our mountain cabin, and it's kind of uphill and I have to carry my backpack and those kinds of, or no, I want to be able to go golfing, or as I said earlier, lift up my grandchild. So start with, what is it functionally you want to be able to do, and be pretty precise about it. We can talk through that. And then, how do I get there? How do I maintain that functioning so that when the years go by, I'm able to do that? What I want to disabuse people of is the concept that one size fits all. We've all been told, well, you should exercise 3 times a week for 30 minutes at a time. And it doesn't really matter whether you go for a walk at a brisk pace or you play tennis. That's what you need to do. And maybe go to the gym if you can. That's not going to get you where you want to get, because you have specific visions of what you want to do. That generic thing may or may not get you there.
10,000. So as an example, 10,000 steps is not the answer for everybody.
No. And as we'll talk in the future ones, where did the science go that it's not 5,000 and it's not 15,000? Because one size doesn't fit all.
I actually heard it. I didn't get the source, but I heard the other day through the heroic stuff that we'll be talking about later months. It's like 5,600. I don't know how they got to that number, but anyway, one size doesn't fit all is the point.
Exactly. And that's what we need to explore. Just like your financial plan, everybody's is going to be different. But you may still have the same $100,000 expenditures a year, but it may be lumpy. For me, I'm going to spend 150 in the first 5 years. Somebody else, and maybe I'm going to spend 75 in the first 5 years. But then when my grandchildren are old enough, I want to take them to Europe and whatever, and it'll be backloaded. So just like that, it's not one size fits all financially, and it won't be one size fits all from a functional standpoint.
And that's going to be from nutritional, and also from the exercise is not necessarily the word I want to use, I guess, because it's muscles, but it's also balance and flexibility and things like that.
All of those things, activities.
I think that's a great framework to continue to use, is to work. And I'm going to begin with the end in mind. And the other part of that too, Bobby, and I'll have to navigate this, and I'll have some questions next week when we talk about exercise. I think of myself, and I have a client who's doing the triple bypass ride in Colorado, which is a 110-mile ride over 3 different peaks at altitude, right? And he's 60-something, early 60s. We have to balance with what we want our life to be like when we're 70 with what gives us life right now. For me, it's mountain biking, which introduces a lot of risk as you do those things. So I imagine there's some balance there, Bobby, because I saw this documentary on Tony Hawk, the famous skateboarder. He's 54, I believe. And they also interviewed a lot of other famous skateboarders from that era. And they're all in their mid-50s, and their bodies are beaten down, and they live with pain. And they argue, at least on this show, that this is our passion, this is our life, and it's just part of the price we pay. So there's probably some balance there between, I got to do these things I love to do, but I still want to be okay when I'm 70. Any ideas of how you find that balance between today and when I'm 70?
It's a crucial issue. you mentioned to me this friend that's doing this major bike ride, and he's probably prepping for months, going up hills and going down hills and whatever. While he's doing that, because he's very focused on that, he's not doing other things, and he is paying the price. So he will be great on a bike and the muscles associated with being on a bike. But all those hours of doing that may get him there. But then later he may be like, well, yeah, I'm not moving in a straight line on a bicycle. Now I'm carrying groceries, or now I'm trying to do that painting. And all of a sudden it's like, God, I spent so many hours focused on that. Maybe I should have balanced it with some of these other things. So runners and cyclists, we're really in shape for going straight.
Yes.
We're not in shape for going sideways. Get them out on a tennis court, and there's a lot of lateral movement on a tennis court or a pickleball court. They're not in shape for that. And they're much more likely to fall and to hurt themselves. So I'm not against being a type A crazy person who does this sport, but do keep in mind that you would like to set aside some other time to round out. Now, people call it CrossFit, and they say, like, well, yeah, I run and I also bike or I swim. That's fine. But that may or may not focus on those other activities that you really want to do. Like try standing on one leg for 2 minutes. That triggers a whole bunch of different muscles that if you're hiking and you're on a wobbly rock, you want those muscles to stop you from falling. There's very simple things that we all can do. You don't have to go to a gym and pay a fancy trainer. Once you figure out what those things are, we can collectively figure out easy things to try to maintain that ability.
That's what we're going to hit on next week when we talk about body movement and exercise. And Bobby, I'm really excited to go on this journey with you this month. And I'm thankful that you are so passionate about this that you pinged me so we could take this journey together. So thanks, man. I'm excited to talk about movement next week.
Me too.
This podcast is sponsored by Boomer Benefits. They speak Medicare, which is really a complicated language, which is too bad because Medicare is a really important benefit that you don't want to make a mistake in. In our practice, when we have a client with a Medicare decision, they're who we turn to help us navigate that decision as a subject matter expert. And the cool thing is their cost is free to you because it's all included within the Medicare program. So when you're looking at making a Medicare decision or just getting more information, I suggest you contact Boomer Benefits at boomerbenefits.com/RAM. Well, now let's get to some of your listener questions. If you have a question for the show, by the way, you can go to rogerwhitney.com/Ask Roger and leave an audio question or type in a question. Also, any links that we talk about on the show, we try to pull them out and we share those links to resources, whether it's a PDF or a website, via our 6-Shot Saturday email, which is essentially our weekly email where we send a summary of the show and our answers and the questions that we've addressed. And you can sign up for that at rogerwhitney.com. All the way at the bottom, I think you can enter your name and your email so you can sign up for that. Promise not to spam you. All right. Our first question comes from Sean as it relates to Roth conversions. Sean says, my wife and I, we currently have $2 million in 403Bs. I'm retiring in June with a pension of $93,000. My wife is retiring in 2024 with a pension of $100,000. And I've been listening to various podcasts. They're all very good, but you are excellent and have more insight in your podcast than anyone else. Well, cool. Sean, I didn't even see that. Thank you. After listening to one of your podcasts with Dr. Wade Pfau, it had me wondering, obviously one of us is going to inherit the other's 403B, and our plan is to withdraw 3 to 4% a year once each of us retires. The $1 million question involves Medicare and the amount we will pay based on our income. There's this hidden tax called IRMA, which is a surcharge. And then the same goes with Social Security. But I don't see how I can stop this based on our pensions alone. So basically saying once we get all these payments from our pensions and other things, Social Security is going to be taxed and we're going to have some IRMA surcharge, which is a surcharge based off of income. Then you're probably right, Sean, based on your pensions alone. Now, those numbers sometimes go up. But Sean's question is, based on all of this, we are definitely in an excellent position, and we understand that. But when we retire, when should we start converting is essentially Sean's question from their 403Bs to Roth accounts, because they have 2 Roth accounts that are about $80,000. And you're in a very typical situation, Sean. Most people are very heavy into the tax-deferred portion. My suggestion, Sean, is to build a plan of record, assuming you're not converting. So build your plan of what are your needs, wants, and wishes, calculate those out and estimate what those cash flows are going to be, match them with how they're going to be paid for by your pensions and Social Security, and then whatever else gets paid for from your assets, and get a feasible plan of record, just assuming you do it the way you say you're going to do it. And once you have that first plan of record, you're going to have some framework to navigate all these decisions. And ultimately, you're not going to get, it's a heck yes, I should do that. The best you're going to get to is a judgment call, but you just want to do that in an organized way. And one reason why it's so important to have this initial plan of record of just the traditional way of doing things is because then you can create what if scenarios. What if I start to convert these 403Bs into Roth accounts? What if I do it all at once with one of them? What if I do it over a period of time? And that way you can start to tease out what makes the most sense. And when you're thinking about taxes, you want to do it in a way where you're not focused just on 1 or 2 years. You want to look at a lifetime tax estimate as you're thinking through this. So you want to think in a multi-year framework rather than what happens this year or next year. And that's a little bit different when we're not retired, because we generally haven't thought that way, and neither do CPAs, but we want to. And one thing you can do once you have this plan of record is you can start to estimate what will my required minimum distributions be from these 403Bs when my wife hit age 72 based off of the plan of record. And it may throw you into a whole different tax bracket, especially with your pensions right from the get-go. And then now having that information, now you can go back and say, well, should I accelerate some of that tax early, meaning now or between now and then in some framework? Because that is the issue before the house here, Sean, is that you're not going to avoid any of this tax. Like you said, especially with those pensions, you're going to be in a pretty high tax bracket. You're not going to go down. So it's really a matter of, do I move my tax payments forward or backwards or delay them? And that's a little bit of a bird in the hand or possibly 2 in the bush, right? Because if you move those tax rates forward by converting aggressively early on, that will lock in the tax rate that you've paid, because you'll pay today's rates. And we know what today's rates are. We don't know what tax rates will be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road. So you've neutralized your tax risk, assuming in the event tax rates go up. So if you're 72 and you're taking these RMDs, we don't know what tax rate you're going to be in. It could be a lot higher than it is today, depending on tax policy. So at least you know what you have, and now this money is growing tax-free for the rest of both of your lives, and you pay tax at the joint bracket. Because you bring up another really good point here, Sean, is that at some point, one of you is going to pass, and it's likely going to be one of you before the other. And when one of you passes, you're going to go from the joint tax code to the individual tax code. But the dollar amounts will still be the same. The required minimum distribution will be roughly the same, but you're going to move up the tax brackets a lot quicker. And the only way to tease this out, Sean, is to really go through an organized process of getting a plan of record, estimating your RMDs, and then modeling some scenarios to set yourself up for your future self. And then that's going to give you some perspective to make the best judgment for you. And it may be somewhere in between. And if you want to get a little bit of grace here, you're not going to get it right. I can pretty much guarantee that. You won't get this right. There's too many unknowables. Markets, inflation, taxes, how long each of you are going to live. You're not going to get it right. So you just want to think through it in an organized way. And I think this framework that we've talked about is the beginnings of doing that. I would be leery of any advice or counsel that says they know what the best thing to do is, because that is not possible. And so it's not being intellectually honest if someone says they have the strategy that makes sense for everybody. But I think that's the beginnings of your answer there, Sean. So hopefully that helps. Our next question comes from Craig. Craig says, love the podcast. I'm a 3+ year avid listener. 3-year anniversary. Awesome, Craig. He says, I'm looking forward to your format changes this month. Keep the good work and keep stretching. We're trying to stretch on the show, Craig. We're always trying to make it better. And sometimes we take a step backwards, but I don't always want it to be the same. We'll keep stretching. Trust me, Nicole knows that I don't do good with always doing it exactly the same way. So thanks for the encouragement. Craig says, I have retired and living the dream. My wife retires in August 2022. We have been working diligently to collect all our 401k, IRA, and Roth accounts into a single brokerage firm. Our goal is to consolidate and simplify our holdings, which I think is a great idea. We talked about this a few weeks ago. This is the time to simplify it. While reading the Kiplinger retirement report, I learned or relearned that the SIPC protection, this is the Security Investor Protection Corporation, which is equivalent to the FDIC protection, but it's not government backed per se. It protects a brokerage account up to $500,000. And the protection depends on the type of account. Individual retirement accounts are grouped together with protection up to $500,000. Traditional IRA, Roth, trust are all treated separately, each to $500,000. Joint accounts are to $500,000, not $500,000 per person. The SIPC covers losses for wrongful activities at the brokerage account, not your bad investments. And this is all Craig. So Craig's actually answering the question. So Craig wants to know, his IRA is over the $500,000 limit. Should he be concerned? Should he have monies at different brokerage accounts to stay within the SIPC limit of $500,000 or more? And you just want to know my thoughts on the topic. Craig, I don't think you should. I think you should continue your consolidation plan. So each of your accounts are separate and you own individual securities within the account threshold. In my 20, almost 30 years in this business, I've never seen an instance where this became an issue at any major firm, meaning not the fringe firms. So I don't think this is an issue, Craig. I wouldn't let this stop you from continuing your consolidation because all of these accounts are very portable. None of them are on the balance sheet of the brokerage firm because you own all these individual investments within this wrapper for your name. Could something happen? Possibly. Has it ever happened in my lifetime? Not that I'm aware of. And as long as you stay with major firms, and I mean the Vanguards, the Schwabs, the LPLs, the Merrills of the world, I think you'll be fine. So I wouldn't worry too much about this. Our next question is actually a comment from my buddy Nick in regards to a question we had on a lady that was retiring at age 53, and it was around her Social Security benefit. And she had gone to the website, if I recall, and pulled what her Social Security benefit was going to be. And she wanted to know how accurate that was, considering that she was retiring at 53. And Nick points out, and I think we pointed this out, Nick, in our answer, that when you get your Social Security estimate from SSA.gov, which is the official site, and I would definitely register so you have your account. When you look at that estimate on your Social Security statement, it is assuming you're making roughly the same earnings up until your full retirement age. So if you want to get a better estimate because you're retiring before your full retirement age, so in this case, this lady at 53, you want to use the Social Security detailed calculator. And they have one on that site. I think we've linked to various versions of it at SSA.gov, and perhaps we can do that again in 6 Shot Saturday, because you want to say you're retiring at your full retirement age. So the way you want to use that calculator, by the way, is you don't want to check the box that you're retiring early. What you want to do is you're retiring at full retirement age, but then you enter your entire earnings history. So every year in which you earned money, you want to put in the compensation you had for that year. And you can get that right off your Social Security statement. It's actually fun to look at. It's right on the back there. And then what you want to do is the year that you retire or that you've stopped working, you just want to enter zeros between, in this case, for this lady, from 54 all the way out to her full retirement age. Let's assume it's 66. And you want to have zeros in those brackets. So the key here when you're using the calculators, don't say you're retiring early. say you're retiring at full retirement age, and then you should want to put zeros in the years when you're actually not going to be working. And if you do that with the detailed calculator, it's going to give you a better estimate of what your payment will be at full retirement age. How substantial is it? It's really going to depend on your earnings, because they're going to look at the last 35-year highest earnings and average them out. So it's going to depend on your earnings history. But thanks for Nick for pointing that out. And I'm sorry if I didn't make that as clear as I should have when we answered the question. Our next question or comment comes from Kathy. Kathy says, "Hey, Roger, I love your podcast. So much great information. Awesome. Kathy has a mortgage question about paying off our mortgage. I retired about a year ago, and my husband is continuing to work until I am 65 and able to enroll in Medicare. From the sale of an investment property, we have enough money to pay off our $150,000 mortgage. Currently, we have 13 years left to pay at 2.5% rate. There is something very appealing about paying off the mortgage, but my husband would like to consider investing the money and continuing to pay the mortgage amount. What would be the right answer?" There isn't a perfect answer for this. Some of this is quantitative, what makes sense from a number standpoint, and some of it's qualitative. And I don't have enough information on your age and year and all that other stuff. So what factors would go into this, Kathy? So let's at least frame it for you. Well, number one is just personality-wise, how do we feel about doing this? Some people, having your mortgage paid off is a big deal emotionally. From a security standpoint, it just feels good. And historically, this has been a big deal. There used to be mortgage burning parties. When you paid off the mortgage, you burned the note and you had a big party. It was a celebratory event. And for a good reason, you own your casa. So you want to decide where you're at for that. Secondly is, how much after-tax money do you have on your net worth statement? Yeah, you have IRAs and maybe Roth IRAs, but how much do you have in after-tax assets? Because the sale of this investment property may help shore up those after-tax assets that you might not have had otherwise. That's important. How much of a cash cushion as you get closer to retirement, and how much closer are you going to get? And how quickly could you pay off the mortgage if you just increased your payments and kept your liquidity? Another consideration is going to be, like your husband's, could we do something else with this money to invest it? That's an important consideration. I would be careful about that one if we take that to extreme. Would you mortgage your house to have the money to invest the money? Might be a way of framing that. If you didn't have a mortgage, would you go mortgage the money, your house, to get the $150,000 in order to invest it because you think you're going to get a better return? If your answer is, well, why would I do that? Of course I wouldn't do that. That is essentially the same thing. It's similar if you own a stock and it's down and you don't want to sell it because it's down, ask yourself, if I just had this cash, would I buy the stock at this price? And if it's like, heck no, then it's like, why would you own it? And some of this and then another factor is going to be how long you are until retirement. I'll use myself as an example because I've shared this. I'm 55. About 2 years ago now, I refinanced my house and I had the money to pay the mortgage off. And I chose not to pay the mortgage off. I chose to refinance, and it's about 2 3/8. Similar interest rate as to you. The amount of the mortgage was a little bit more than the 150. And my logic for not paying it off was, I'm 54, I'm paying extra to my mortgage now, and I wanted that liquidity on my balance sheet because I'm an entrepreneur. I have lumpy cash flow at times. I have money I need to invest in the business. And most of my liquid assets were really in retirement accounts. It was imbalanced because I had been saving in retirement accounts for a year. I didn't have as much on my personal balance sheet. So I chose not to pay off my mortgage and keep the money as cash. And honestly, I'm keeping it as cash. I'm not even investing it. And it's because I value the liquidity. I like to have a lot of risky assets in terms of long-term growth and a lot of very secure assets. And I know that I have a 15-year period before I even consider not working. So some of that will depend on where you're at. If you're going to be retiring in a year or two, you'll want to have a plan of record. This is where that would help you too, Kathy. If you had your plan of record of you're building semi-passive income by investment properties, so forth, then maybe this fits into the plan. And you can look at the cash flows and the potential of that relative to paying off the house. But there isn't really a right answer, Kathy. You just want to make sure you think through it in an organized way. And with that, why don't we go set a SMART sprint.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to set a little baby step you can take in the next 7 days to not just rock retirement, but rock life. So in the next 7 days, I want you to start thinking about your health regimen, your protocol for health, and how dialed in is it relative to the things that you say you want to be able to do later in life. We talked about riding on a bicycle like me, where you're just going straight. That doesn't help you with side to side. In terms of navigating steps, how well-rounded would you think your health regimen is? Just start thinking about that, and then we'll start to frame this in. And next week, we'll start talking about movement and exercise. So in February, when we brought in our last cohort into the Rock Retirement Club, we had 170 people come in. And so that was pretty incredible. And they were so engaged. And I imagine this next cohort will be. And the cool thing, and the reason why we switched to cohorts, is when we bring in a group of people together, we have a lot of special events within the club on helping them understand what the club has to offer, the financial planning tools, the masterclass on financial planning, the meetups. And we have a lot of conversations so we can make sure that we're all making the most of this one amazing life. Would love for you to join us and at least chat about it. You can go to rockretirementclub.com to join the wait list, or join us on the 19th, where we'll have some open discussion of what the club is about so you can get your questions answered. I hope you have a wonderful day. Hey, it's time for that all-important disclaimer. We so appreciate you listening to the show and love your questions and love the teaching that we're able to provide here. And actually, it helps us too. But remember, you're not our clients.
Not love it if you took advice from us on the show.
We would not love it if you took advice from us on the show. Realize it's helpful in education. Talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before you make any decisions.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.